FPL is back this week. In today's video, I'm going to take a look at the 10 best players to have in your Game Week 1 squads in each position. Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. Today's video will be the first in a regular series, picking out the best players to buy by position, and obviously using data to support the decisions. The data I'm using is all provided by Solo Analytics. There's a link in the description below. It's all totally free for the first month. Do go check it out. I absolutely love the tool. And the way that I've ranked each of these positions is by the expected points in the first game week. If you enjoyed today's video, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and hit subscribe so you don't miss out on any future content. In the meantime, though, let's start by looking at the defenders. Now, what I find really interesting with Game Week 1 is that the Spurs assets in particular rise right to the top of the expected points. Pedro Porro in particular is a standout good pick if you are looking at just Game Week 1 in isolation. 5.59 expected points against Burnley at home. Then you've also got Romero and Van der Ven. Van der Ven is the only 4.5 that appears on this spreadsheet. There are some good options out there that will consistently drip feed points and be good over the 5 game weeks, but Van der Ven really does come out as an interesting pick if you're looking for a short-term horizon, that Burnley fixture. What I would say about Spurs assets in general, and I do like them, but the expected points over the first 5 does drop dramatically once Burnley is out of the way. There are still question marks over that defence. Thomas Frank is looking for another centre-back as well. So I do just wonder how good they're going to be as options once that Game Week 1 fixture is out the way. A few people are considering using Pedro Porro to move across to someone like a Daniel Munoz in Game Week 2. I think that's absolutely fine. But it all depends how many other transfers you're looking at booking in for the first few game weeks. You don't want to give yourself too much to do to get to a squad that you're happy with in the long term. So Porro's underlying data is fantastic. Great Game Week 1 fixture. Not bad on the defensive contribution percentage either, that CBIT percentage. For a fullback, that is actually pretty decent, but that expected points does start dropping once Burnley is out the way. So a bit of a decision to make there, whether you want to plan for the short term, maximize upside in Game Week 1, or perhaps just pick someone at 5.5 who's a bit more steady Eddie, that's going to drip feed points, and over 5 game weeks, probably start to overtake Porro after he gets off to what you would expect to be a hot start. So the 5.5s on this spreadsheet are Murillo, you've got Tarkowski, you've also got Konate as well. We'll come on to Liverpool in a minute. But looking at Murillo and Tarkowski in isolation, the reason they stand out as particularly good picks is because of that defensive contribution percentage. Both of them are looking at getting that extra 2 points in over 50% of matches. So even if they didn't have the best fixtures, which by the way, both of them have got a decent run at the start of the season, you'd expect them to get a drip feed of 4 pointers most game weeks, or at least in over 50% of game weeks, even without the clean sheets. They've also got a bit of goal threat as well. So I think they kind of tick all of the boxes you'd want in a 5.5 million option. And I do just wonder if it would be worth going for them as long-term picks, unless you're wildcarding very early on, of course, instead of someone like Porro, just to make sure that you're not booking in a transfer long-term. And I think Murillo and Tarkowski are both standout picks at that price point. Now, looking at the Liverpool assets, you've got a real battle going on between Frimpong and Van Dijk. There's not much separating it. And even the expected points over the first 5 game weeks, again, there's 1 point in it. Frimpong is marginally coming out on top right now. I think in part that will be because of Bradley's injury. If Bradley was definitely fit, I think the minutes drop slightly. Obviously, I still expect him to start, but Bradley won't get 0 minutes. Frimpong's attacking data is absolutely ridiculous, and I do expect that to cross-pollinate to the Premier League very well. Obviously, he scored in the Community Shield, little bit of a fluke goal, but the positions he was getting into were very advanced. So I expect him to come out with attacking returns at fairly regular intervals, but Van Dijk is going to get you those defensive contributions much more regularly. In fact, Frimpong is expected to get almost none, whereas Van Dijk, for a defender at his price point who gets regular clean sheets, does actually get a fair chunk of them. So I think it's a matter of how you want to play the game this season. If you want to go out for those big attacking returns, Frimpong is going to spike those fairly regularly, but Van Dijk is probably going to have a higher floor than Frimpong, where if they don't keep a clean sheet, Frimpong's only going to get a 2-pointer if he doesn't get any attack and returns. Van Dijk might regularly get 4 points, and then also the clean sheets added into that as well. Obviously, Frimpong will get the same. So I think they'll balance each other out fairly nicely. There's also another decision to make as to whether or not you think Liverpool are even worth going for in the first few game weeks, considering those fixtures. Bournemouth have lost a lot of players, but mostly in their backline. You'd expect their attack to be relatively sharp still. Newcastle and Arsenal are no mugs in terms of attack either, of course. Burnley is probably the first bankable clean sheet fixture, but obviously no guarantees. I think if you go with a Liverpool player, it's because you've got a longer horizon for when you want to wildcard. I've currently got Van Dijk. The reason is because over a stretch of 12 game weeks, I expect them to come out very, very good in terms of the clean sheets they're going to end up accumulating and the defensive contributions Van Dijk is going to get. Looking elsewhere, you've got Gvardiol, you've got Cucurella on this spreadsheet. I probably wouldn't be going with either from the off just because of those expected points over the first 5. They're good picks and they'll tick along very nicely. Neither of them are very good on the CBIT percentage. So for me, I favour Van Dijk right now, but neither of them are bad picks, of course. But when you've got players like Murillo and Tarkowski at a little bit cheaper, who are defensive contribution monsters and are probably expected around about the same amount of clean sheets in the first 5 game weeks, I'd probably just save the money, honestly. So moving into midfield, no surprises whatsoever who comes out on top. Mo Salah by quite a distance, expected to get an average of about 7 points a game week, just over the first 5 game weeks, and is by far the highest on the expected points in game week 1 across the entire player base as well. He's better than any of the forwards too. So 8.37 points. I can see arguments for going without him because he is expensive, and it wasn't the best performance in the Community Shield yesterday either. But I don't want to be too reactionary. The markets are still suggesting he's going to do very, very well, and I wouldn't let one bad performance put you off. 0.90 XGI per 90 last season, and he's expected to do even better than that in the first 5 game weeks from the projection models. So he's expected to run over 1 attacking return per game. Again, always use that with a pinch of salt. It's just what the markets are saying, so you can interpret that, and on Solio you can have a little fiddle with the data as well to match what your opinions are too. But I think it would take quite a regression for him to not be a standout good option in the first few game weeks. He is expensive though, so by all means feel free to go without him, but have a big sofa if you are doing so, because you are going to want to hide behind it every week. After that, you've got Palmer, Wirtz, Saka, Bruno, all coming out pretty well on the models. Unsurprisingly, they're expensive assets. Palmer does come out quite far ahead of Saka, which kind of makes that decision for me a little bit. Saka's first 2 fixtures not looking too bad. I think the markets are a little bit worried about him losing penalty share. If you think he's got penalties, then you might want to bump those numbers up a little bit. But Palmer will have penalties. He will get 85, 90 minutes a match. The data matches Saka's in terms of last season's underlying XGI, but it's more heavily skewed towards goals as well, which again is another factor in Palmer's favour. The expected points in game week 1 is also quite far ahead of any of the other midfielders bar Salah. So I currently have a draft of Salah times Palmer. I think that's a popular one. Obviously, both of them are owned by over half of the player base. Moving down to the next price point, you've got Wirtz, you've got Bruno, and you've got Marmoush all appearing on this spreadsheet. Wirtz is expected to do really well from the start. Bournemouth at home is a good fixture. But what is interesting is that over the first 5 game weeks, Bruno Fernandes is expected to overtake him in terms of the expected points. Now, that will be because he's on penalties and because he's guaranteed 90 minutes. Although he's not got a great opening fixture against Arsenal, he does have Burnley at home in there as well. So very similar to Wirtz, who's got Burnley in game week 4. So that will balance out a little bit. But I imagine the reason that Wirtz maybe slightly falls behind Bruno is because he doesn't have the benefit of penalties, and he also maybe isn't completely locked in for 90 minutes. I think he is very likely to get 85, 90 most weeks because of the talent he has. But Bruno, we know from seasons and seasons worth of data that he is going to get 90 minutes most weeks, and he probably will have penalties and set pieces as well. So I think that's why the market's quite like him. However, he does have a tough opening fixture, and Wirtz has looked fantastic as well. So if you want to save the 0.5, he is expected a higher XGI per 90 in the first 5 game weeks. I think there's a real decision there as to whether or not you want to spend that extra 0.5 elsewhere. And I can see a massive argument for going with Wirtz over Bruno. Marmoush also comes into it as well with 0.71 XGI per 90 expected. That's higher than either Bruno or Wirtz, but the minutes are, again, slightly doubtful. Now, what has happened this morning is Savinho is now linked with Tottenham for a transfer. That might help Marmoush on the underlying expected minutes, and that might boost him up enough to put him right in the mix with Bruno, with Wirtz, because the less competition he's got on either side of Erling Haaland, the more likely he is to get stronger minutes. So Marmoush could be a nice little differential. I mean, he's still 13% owned, but I'm not seeing him in a lot of community teams right now. He might be a very interesting asset for the first 4 game weeks with some good fixtures in there. No standout fixtures, but you'd expect him to tick along very nicely. We've also got a few cheaper assets on this spreadsheet. You've got Kudus, who's expected to get off to a hot start against Burnley at home, although not quite as high on the expected points as I would have previously imagined. 4.79. That might be due to the fact that he is playing wider than we maybe wanted him to be. His underlying XG over previous seasons hasn't been fantastic either. And whilst the markets are expecting him to bump up a little bit to around about a goal or an assist every other game, it's still not standout good. And at 6.5 million, I wonder if there are other assets that you might want to look at. That game week 1 fixture, again, a bit like what I said with Porro, if you want to get off to a hot start, Kudus is not a bad pick whatsoever. But what is interesting is that even the likes of Paquetá and Enzo Fernandez, 2 surprise entries to the top 10 here, they're not expected to do that well in game week 1, but over the first 5 game weeks, they are expected to overtake Kudus. So Paquetá likely to have penalties if he's on the pitch, and it looks likely he will be on the pitch for a lot longer this season. West Ham fans are raving about him in the pre-season. He's looked very, very good. So the markets are suggesting at 6 million, he could be an interesting differential pickup at just 1% ownership. And then Enzo Fernandez, I'm really surprised by, but good fixtures to start the season, not bad underlying attacking data. And again, he's very good on the expected minutes, a bit like Bruno Fernandes, not the most exciting of picks, but he has set pieces, he gets good minutes, the data's not terrible. I can understand why he's in the mix here, although I'm a little bit surprised that he's in here ahead of the likes of an Ndiaye or an Ismail Assar, both of which I also deem to be very good picks to start the season with. On to the forward line, and Erling Haaland, of course, comes out top by quite a distance, but what is interesting here is the expected points for the first 5 game weeks, 30.7, whilst good, it's actually significantly below Mo Salah and also below Cole Palmer. So at 3.5 million less, Cole Palmer is expected to outperform Haaland in terms of the actual output of points. Now, Haaland is expected to do really well in terms of goals. The underlying XG per 90 is extremely high as well. But is it worth the outlay when forwards get 1 less point for a goal and have been nerfed a little bit in terms of the bonus points? So penalties are now slightly less effective for forwards when it comes to the bonus points that they might expect to get as a result of them. So let's say, for example, Man City win 1-0, Erling Haaland scores but only with a penalty and does nothing else in the match. It might now swing towards the defenders getting the bonus points more often than Erling Haaland doing so. So whilst he's still a great option and he still will tick along very nicely with the points, I do just wonder if, unless he gets a couple of returns a match, he's going to be worth the money. Now, again, there are great drafts out there with Haaland in there, and he will get good points, no question about it. He's still up there. But I'm trying to look for value to start with. So that's the reason I'm not going with Erling Haaland at the moment. That whilst as a player, he's fantastic, FPL is maybe just not favouring the forwards as much as I'd want them to be spending 14 million on an asset like him. So I'm sure he'll come into my thinking at certain times. I'm sure he'll be in my side at certain times, but I want that security of the higher expected points of Mo Salah and Cole Palmer to start the season. And value is important as well. That 3.5 million goes a long way if I use Cole Palmer in my game week 1 side over Erling Haaland. I can spread those funds quite far and get quite a lot more expected points across my 11. Now, moving down from Erling Haaland, what is interesting here is across the board, the forwards, there's not much separating them despite the price point. So Ekitike, 23.2 expected points at 8.5 million. You've got Bowen at just a 0.5 million less at 22 points. Watkins, 0.5 million more at 23.8 points. So there's only really like 1 or 2 points separating these guys over the first 5 game weeks. Then you go down to someone who's a lot cheaper, like a Thiago or more importantly, Strand Larsen. And again, there's only a couple of points separating a 6.5 million asset from some of the more expensive ones. So I think the forward line is a place where you can maybe try and gain value for money. Strand Larsen should be on penalties, although no guarantees, should get good minutes. And across the first 5 game weeks is expected a goal or an assist every other game. So whilst some of the options here who are more expensive do provide a little bit more than that, I'm not sure if that couple of points is worth the extra 2 million or 1.5 million in certain cases, where with the midfielders, there was a big jump up to the likes of Wirtz, Bruno Fernandes or Marmoush in comparison to some of the cheaper midfielders. So I think this is a place where I want to gain value. There are some good 7.5 million options in here. Would João Pedro and Mateta all feature? I've got a sneaky feeling that Mateta is going to become a little bit more popular, pretty differential right now. João Pedro has been in sensational form in pre-season, and I think the reason he's not coming out even better on these models is because the expected minutes aren't quite there. I think most people expect him to get taken off around 70 minutes most games. But if you think that he won't have that happen to him and he's going to start and play 90 minutes or get north of 70, this all bumps up a little bit, and he could be a really effective asset at 7.5. Very highly owned as well, so it will be quite dangerous to go without him because he could do a lot of damage to your rank to begin with. And we have seen the quality. We know he's a fantastic player, and the expected goals over the first 5 game weeks are pretty decent as well. Looking at the slightly more premium assets, so the 8 to 9 million assets, you've got Watkins, you've got Gyökeres, Ekitike and Bowen all featuring on this list. Ekitike comes out top for game week 1, but over the first 5 game weeks, Gyökeres and Watkins are both expected to overtake him. I expect that's because there's still transfer speculation around Alexander Isak. And if he comes in, Ekitike's minutes might take a little bit of a nosedive. Now, that's not to say he won't start, but at the end of the day, they only play with 3 forwards. They've got the 2 wingers and that centre forward. Ekitike is currently running through the middle. If Isak comes in as a big money signing, you'd expect he runs through the middle. Ekitike maybe gets pushed out wide to the left, or maybe doesn't start at all. And that will be what is impacting his expected points over the first 5. And also, unlike maybe Watkins, which we don't know yet, and again, maybe Gyökeres, he won't have penalties. Whereas Watkins and Gyökeres both might do potentially. So again, if you wanted to get off to a hot start, Liverpool assets are looking great. Ekitike, very, very likely to start in game week 1 and great goal share as well. But over the first 5 game weeks, if you wanted to save transfers, Watkins and Gyökeres are both expected to possibly overtake him, in part due to the likelihood or the potential for penalties, whereas Ekitike has very low potential for that. A final interesting inclusion in this spreadsheet is Thiago at Brentford. I think the models are hot on him because they expect Wissa to be off in the next couple of weeks or so. But because we don't have any guarantees on that at the moment, I find it hard to recommend him as a great pick right now. Even at 6 million, he could become great value. He could be on penalties and he could be getting great minutes if Wissa goes. But whilst Wissa's still at the club, we just don't know for sure that Thiago's place is locked in at centre forward week in, week out. And I would prefer to see him as a player to maybe pivot towards once we know what Wissa's situation is. They're also in the market for, I think, Dango Altara at time of recording. And I don't think that necessarily directly impacts that centre forward role too much. It will maybe have a bit of a knock-on effect. So Thiago, I think, can be a really good pick at 6 million, but I am still a little bit nervous considering that transfer for Wissa hasn't yet gone through. So wrapping up with the goalkeepers, and the first important thing to notice here is the expected points over the first 5 game weeks. It's pretty congested. There's not much separating the best goalkeepers with some of the more average picks. So I wouldn't stress too much about your goalkeepers. Just make sure you find someone that you're happy and comfortable sticking with for the medium term. Now, 5.5 million options do come out slightly on top in certain cases. Alisson at 19.1 expected points. But even if you drop down to 5 million, there's maybe only 1 point in it between the best options. So Sanchez at 18.3 expected points is very, very close, and you can save yourself 0.5 million. So I think arguably it's worth just saving the money. Now, Vicario comes out on top of all of the goalkeepers for game week 1 at 4.35 expected points. So you might want to take a bit of a short-term punt on him. But again, there's not really much separating him, even in game week 1, with some of the other options. So I don't think it's worth the upside just for that Burnley fixture. So I wouldn't be looking at Vicario necessarily. Sanchez comes out really well in terms of the 5.0s. Alisson's good, but is it worth that 0.5 extra? Then you've got the likes of Edison, who we don't know for certain that he's going to start the season. Trafford could be competing for that number 1 spot. Both of them played 45 in a pre-season friendly, so I would feel very shaky recommending either of them right now until we know more. Sells is good, but a lot of us have Nottingham Forest defenders, and the upside is definitely there on the Nottingham Forest defenders with the defensive contributions as well. So Sells maybe can be put to one side because of that, and a lot of people don't want to double up. Not a bad pick by any means, but he doesn't have as good XGC per 90 and is slightly lower on the expected clean sheets for the first 5 game weeks as well than Sanchez. Pickford, I think over the season is going to churn out points and going to be a great pick, but at the start, 0.5 million extra for lower expected points, I'm not so sure. I think Kelleher, Verbruggen and Areola at 4.5 million, there's not really too much separating any of them. Kelleher's got an injured out, so that's a little bit of an issue. Verbruggen is fine, but not really exciting. Not great fixtures to start the season either. Expected around 1 clean sheet in the first 5 game weeks. And Areola, although the market still don't mind him, they've just signed Hermansen from Leicester, who is a very good keeper. And he could easily lose his spot in the first 4 game weeks anyway. So I can't recommend Areola. I also probably can't recommend Hermansen either, because we don't know which keeper's going to start the season. And I think it's likely Hermansen takes the place, but I don't know which week that's going to come in. So the 4.5 million options, a bit of a wasteland at the moment. There's not many that I really like the look of. And the data and the models suggest the same. So I think if possible, unless you want to go for Verbruggen, you can also look at Petrovic as well, who after Liverpool in game week 1, not a bad option. Outside of that, I don't think there's a lot, and I'd probably just use that extra 0.5 million to go with a Sells or a Sanchez, who I think are unexciting, but they will churn out points at regular intervals, and the expected clean sheets over the first 5 game weeks are not bad either. So I think it might be worth spending the extra 0.5 there, but if you don't have the 0.5, it is important to remember that there's really not much separating any of these keepers in terms of the expected points. So you're not really going to lose out on too much if you needed to use that 0.5 elsewhere and just go with a Verbruggen or a Petrovic for the first few game weeks. Now, as we reach the end of today's video, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell for any future content, and I'll see you tomorrow as we take a look at the best captaincy picks ahead of game week 1.